the remote hotel in Texas, where no one leaves after midnight. After leaving the cursed house deep in the Louisiana swamps, Kate and I couldn't shake off what had happened. The eerie images, the whispers in the night, and the strange ending lingered in our minds. Physically and mentally exhausted, we felt an overwhelming urge to continue our journey, as if an unseen force was guiding us forward. Our motorcycle veered onto a path heading west, where vast fields gave way to the arid desert landscape of Texas. The sun began to set, casting the last golden rays of the day over the desolate surroundings, creating a hauntingly beautiful scene. But that beauty didn't last long. The motorcycle suddenly broke down in the middle of a deserted road. I tried restarting it several times, but it was no use. In front of us was an endless stretch of desert, and behind us was the long, empty road we had just traveled. With no other choice, we pushed the bike along the road, hoping to find shelter for the night. And then, we saw it. Ahead of us stood an old building with a rusty iron sign swaying in the dry wind. The Resting Place Inn. The hotel stood alone on the edge of the desert, seemingly forgotten by time. Large windows, yellowed and covered with dust and cobwebs, hinted at years of neglect. A small bell hung by the front door, looking like it hadn't been used in decades. We stepped into the lobby. Inside, the hotel had a vintage charm, slightly eerie but still retaining some of its old grandeur. Faded paintings adorned the walls, and a large chandelier hung from the ceiling, covered in dust. Behind the reception desk stood an elderly woman with sharp yet friendly eyes. "Welcome to the Resting Place Inn. I'm Agatha, the owner of this hotel. Looks like you two need a place to stay for the night?" Kate and I nodded, relieved to finally find shelter. Agatha handed us a room key, but before we could leave, she added in a calm yet chilling tone, "There is one important rule after midnight. Never leave your room." I glanced at Kate, suppressing a smile. Stories about haunted hotels often began with such warnings, and I thought it was just a local superstition meant to create an atmosphere. "Thank you for the advice. We'll keep that in mind," I replied, heading up the stairs to our room. Our room was on the second floor, small but clean, with a window overlooking the desert. Moonlight streamed through the thin curtains, creating a peaceful atmosphere. After the terrifying events in Louisiana, this seemed like the perfect place to rest. Kate sat on the bed, took off her shoes, and let out a deep sigh of relief. I checked my watch. 11 p.m. time had passed faster than I thought. "Tom, I'm going to take a shower and go straight to bed. It's been a long day." I nodded, picked up a book from the table, and began reading to pass the time. But as the clock approached 11:30, things started to change. Around 11:45, I heard a soft knock on the door. At first, I thought it was Kate, but she was still in the bathroom. I opened the door, but the hallway was empty. Only a trail of wet footprints stretched from the stairs up to our room before fading away. A chill ran down my spine, but I tried to shake off the unease. I closed the door, sat back down, and resumed reading. Shortly after, Kate emerged from the bathroom, her hair still damp, with a curious look on her face. "Did you hear that? I think someone was walking outside." I nodded and told her about the knock and the mysterious footprints. Kate sat down beside me, her exhaustion replaced by concern. But before we could say more, the knocking returned. This time, it was louder and more insistent, like someone desperately trying to get in. I stood up, my heart pounding. I opened the door, and what I saw froze me in place. At the end of the hallway stood a woman in a white dress. Her back turned toward me. Her hair hung down in tangled strands, obscuring her face. She remained motionless for a few seconds, then slowly turned her head. But instead of a normal face, it was a pale, featureless mask with empty black eyes. I stumbled back and slammed the door shut. "Tom, what's wrong?" Kate asked, her voice trembling. I don't know, but something is definitely wrong here. Kate and I stood in the pitch-dark room, our hearts pounding. Outside in the hallway, everything fell eerily silent. The figure of the woman had vanished as if she had never been there. I could feel it in my gut. Something was seriously wrong with this hotel. Agatha's warning wasn't just a joke. "Tom, what should we do?" Kate whispered, her eyes filled with worry. "We need to figure out what's going on here," I replied, asterisk, "but maybe it's best we stick to her advice and not leave after midnight." Just as I finished speaking, the overhead light flickered and died. The room was engulfed in complete darkness. The wind howled through the window, and somewhere in the hotel, a soft, sinister chuckle echoed. Kate clutched my hand tightly. "Did you hear that?" "Yeah, something's not right." We grabbed a flashlight from our backpack and decided to investigate. I cracked the door open and shone the flashlight down the dark hallway. The wet footprints were still there, leading toward the end of the corridor, where the door to room 13 stood slightly ajar. Kate and I walked slowly down the hallway. The air grew cold and oppressive with each step. Our footsteps echoed eerily in the silence, blending with the sound of our own breathing. The door to room 13 loomed ahead. It was open just enough for the flashlight beam to reveal part of the room inside. I hesitated for a moment before pushing the door open. Inside was an abandoned room covered in dust. Torn, yellowed papers were scattered across the floor, and countless black and white photographs hung haphazardly on the walls. What made my blood run cold was that every photograph depicted former guests of the hotel, all with their eyes gouged out. Kate stepped closer and picked up one of the photos. "Tom, look at this. It's Agatha, but she looks much younger." I walked over and examined the photo. In it, Agatha stood among the other guests. But something was disturbingly wrong. All the other people had hollow, empty eye sockets, except for her. "Something is seriously wrong here," I said. "We need to leave this hotel immediately." Just then, the door slammed shut behind us. A soft chuckle echoed again, seemingly coming from everywhere at once. I rushed to the door and tried to open it, but it wouldn't budge. We were trapped inside room 13. The flashlight flickered, then died. I could feel a chilling breeze run down my spine. "Who's there?" I shouted, but only my voice echoed back. Suddenly, a raspy, ghostly voice filled the air. "You shouldn't be here." The flashlight flickered back on, and in its dim light, the woman in the white dress stood before us. Her eyes, empty, black voids, stared straight at us, filled with rage and sorrow. Kate backed away in terror. "Please, don't hurt us," she begged. The woman didn't respond. Instead, she raised a trembling hand and pointed toward an old wardrobe in the corner of the room. I hesitated for a few seconds before walking toward it and opening the doors. Inside was a hidden passage leading downward. "Kate, let's go." I grabbed her hand, and we descended into the dark passage. The passage led us into a massive basement. Dim candlelight cast eerie shadows on the walls. Strange symbols were carved into the stone, and in the center of the room stood an enormous, tarnished mirror with an ornate bronze frame. "Tom, I don't like this place at all," Kate said. I nodded. "That mirror, it might be the source of all this." Before I could act, the image in the mirror began to distort. Instead of reflecting us, the mirror showed a nightmarish scene. Former guests of the hotel, standing silently with twisted faces and hollow eyes. The woman in the white dress appeared behind us. This time, she wasn't just a ghostly apparition, she was a living, breathing entity radiating power. "You will never leave." I grabbed a nearby piece of metal and struck the mirror with all my strength. A deafening shriek filled the room, and everything seemed to be sucked into the void. The light returned. We stood in the now empty basement. No ghosts, no mirror, no symbols. The hidden passage led us back to the hotel lobby. Agatha was at the reception desk, smiling gently. "Thank you," you've set us free." Before we could say a word, she vanished into a thin wisp of smoke. Kate and I ran out of the hotel and into the early morning light. Our motorcycle started up without a hitch, as if it had never broken down. We looked back. The hotel had disappeared, leaving only an empty lot. Kate gripped my hand tightly. "Tom, I think this journey is far from over." I nodded, revved the engine, and we rode off toward the horizon, knowing that the world held countless more mysteries waiting for us to uncover. The haunted forest in West Virginia. We left the resting place inn with a sense of relief, but we couldn't shake the lingering unease. What we had just experienced made Kate and me realize that the world harbored far more terrifying secrets than we had ever imagined. The fresh morning air in the Texas desert helped erase some of the previous night's memories, but a faint sense of dread still loomed. "I think we should take a break, but perhaps continuing the journey is the best way to stay focused," Kate said, gazing at the road ahead. I nodded and started the motorcycle. We resumed our journey, this time heading northeast toward the Green Hills and the mysterious Dismal Forest in West Virginia. According to what I had read, the forest was steeped in eerie legends, particularly about a shadowy entity known as the Watcher, who was said to follow anyone brave enough to camp in the woods after sunset. "Sounds like a fun camping story, right?" I joked, though a hint of worry lingered in my heart. "Or another nightmare waiting for us?" Kate replied with a half-smile. The Dismal Forest greeted us in the late afternoon. The path into the forest was narrow, surrounded by towering trees that seemed to welcome us and warn us at the same time. The last rays of sunlight filtered through the canopy, creating shimmering patterns on the leaf-strewn ground. At first, the scenery appeared peaceful. Birds chirped from above, and the rustling leaves added a lively touch to the surroundings. "See, with air this fresh, it's hard to believe anything creepy could happen here," Kate said, taking a deep breath. I chuckled, but my instincts urged me to stay alert. We decided to venture deeper into the forest to explore. According to what I knew, the Watcher only appeared at night, once the sun had completely set. We set up camp in a small clearing in the middle of the woods. The tent was modest but sufficient for a night's stay. After preparing everything, we lit a campfire and sat beside it, talking about the places we had visited. Time passed quickly. The sun gradually disappeared behind the treetops, leaving the sky painted in hues of red and orange. The air grew colder, and the sound of insects filled the forest. "Maybe we should get into the tent and rest early," I suggested, sensing a change in the atmosphere. Kate nodded, but just then, we heard an unusual sound. It was a soft, giggling sound, gentle yet echoing among the trees. "Is that a child?" Kate whispered, her eyes fixed on the darkness ahead. I shook my head. It was impossible for a child to be here at this hour. The sound grew louder and seemed to circle around us. "Don't leave the tent," I said, feeling the presence of something dangerous. Outside, the giggling turned into footsteps, light but deliberate. The air grew stifling, and suddenly, the campfire extinguished inexplicably, leaving us in complete darkness. Despite the tension, we managed to stay calm. I switched on the flashlight, illuminating the surroundings, but instead of calming our nerves, the light made everything more terrifying. The shadows cast by the trees formed strange shapes, almost as if they were moving. I pointed the flashlight at a nearby tree and froze. Strange symbols were carved deep into the bark. They looked like ancient markings, perhaps a language or a symbol I had never seen before. "Kate, look, these symbols." I called her over. Kate frowned and touched one of the carvings. At that exact moment, the wind picked up violently, and the entire forest seemed to shudder. A chill ran down my spine. "We shouldn't stay here too long," she said, her voice filled with concern. I wholeheartedly agreed, but as we turned back toward the tent, everything had changed. The tent was still there, but the surrounding trees seemed to have shifted, forming a circle around us. While trying to reorient ourselves, Kate pointed ahead. "Tom, look, a cabin." It was an old wooden cabin with a decaying roof and moss-covered walls. Strangely, it wasn't marked on the map we had brought along. Still, given the circumstances, it seemed like a temporary refuge. Kate and I stepped inside, and an icy chill greeted us the moment the creaky wooden door swung open. The interior was covered in dust and cobwebs. On a wooden table, we found an old journal. I opened the journal and flipped through it. The last page contained a hastily scribbled message. "The Watcher is here." Kate and I exchanged a glance, neither of us needing to say a word. We both understood one thing. The worst was just beginning. Kate and I stood frozen, our hearts pounding. The hastily scribbled words in the old journal sent chills down our spines. "The Watcher is here." The Watcher had arrived. "Tom, we need to get out of here right now," Kate said, her voice trembling, yet her eyes held a strange determination. I nodded in agreement, but just as we turned to leave, the wooden cabin shook slightly, as though something was moving around us. As night fully enveloped the forest, it became cloaked in a suffocating darkness. Our flashlight flickered erratically, and the crunch of dry leaves underfoot seemed to echo louder than it should. Shadows flitted across our vision, weaving in and out between the towering trees. "Kate, something is watching us," I whispered, tightening my grip on her hand. Trying to stay calm, the flashlight's beam landed on a nearby tree, and my breath caught in my throat. Bright eyes stared back at us from the darkness. They vanished the moment I moved the light, but the overwhelming sense of being watched remained. Kate tugged at my arm, trying to lead me back toward our tent, but it was no longer where we had left it. The forest had changed, rearranging itself like a living maze, making it impossible to find our bearings. Desperate to find a way out, we stumbled upon an open clearing in the woods. At its center was a circle of large stones, each engraved with symbols that mirrored those carved into the trees. Suddenly, a fierce wind whipped through the clearing. The sound of giggling morphed into agonized wails, and the air seemed to thicken with malevolent energy. The darkness began to coalesce, taking the shape of a towering, shadowy figure, the Watcher. "The Watcher," Kate whispered, her eyes wide with terror. The shadowy entity moved toward us with slow, deliberate steps. Its presence radiated power and menace. I tried to pull Kate back, but the wind was so strong it nearly knocked us off our feet. In the midst of the chaos, Kate suddenly remembered the symbols we had seen on the trees and stones. "Tom, these symbols, they might be protective wards," she shouted above the howling wind. With no other choice, we quickly traced the symbols on the ground around us using small stones and sticks. The moment the final symbol was completed, a soft blue light enveloped us, forming a protective circle. The Watcher howled in rage, slamming against the barrier. Each time it touched the light, it was repelled with a burst of energy. We stood within the circle, our hearts pounding, waiting for the nightmare to end. Finally, the Watcher dissolved into the darkness, its howls fading into the wind. As the forest fell silent once more, we knew we had only one chance to escape. Gripping each other's hands tightly, We ran as fast as we could in the direction we believed was the way out. The forest continued to shift and twist around us, but a faint light began to break through the canopy, the first light of dawn. I had never been so relieved to see the sun rise. It felt like a promise that we had survived the night. At last, we burst out of the forest. Gasping for breath, our motorcycle was still there, covered in a thin layer of morning dew. "We made it," Kate said, her voice trembling with relief. We climbed onto the bike, ready to leave, but as I glanced in the rearview mirror, my heart nearly stopped. Standing at the edge of the forest, right where we had just emerged, was the shadowy figure of the Watcher. It didn't move, it simply stood there, watching us. I said nothing, revved the engine, and sped down the road. Kate looked at me, her eyes full of questions. "What is it, Tom?" "Nothing. I just think we shouldn't come back here ever again." But deep down, I knew that our journey was far from over, and the mysteries of this world had only just begun. The abandoned school in Alabama, the haunting laughter in the night. After leaving the eerie, dismal forest in West Virginia, Kate and I decided to head south to Alabama. The journey led us to a small, peaceful town called Millhaven, where we planned to rest before continuing our trip. The motorcycle carried us along narrow roads flanked by vast fields and ancient trees. The town appeared like a forgotten remnant of time, with its old buildings and quiet streets. But beneath its tranquil surface, there was something unsettling, as if the town harbored a dark secret. While taking a break at a roadside cafe, we overheard locals talking about Cedar Mill Elementary, an abandoned elementary school from the 1970s. According to their stories, every night, people could hear the sound of children laughing and footsteps echoing through the empty hallways. They say the children who vanished in the fire of 1974 are still there. A middle-aged man whispered, "If you're smart, you'll never set foot inside that place at night." That was all we needed to make up our minds. "Tom, I think this is our chance to investigate," Kate said, her eyes gleaming with curiosity and a hint of challenge. I smiled. "Of course, we've come too far to turn back now." That night, we made our way to Cedar Mill Elementary, located on the outskirts of town. Surrounded by overgrown vegetation, the silver moonlight bathed the building in an eerie glow. The iron gate creaked as I pushed it open, revealing a path covered with dry leaves leading to the school entrance. The school loomed in the distance, with broken windows and walls covered in ivy. The old sign above the entrance still read Cedar Mill Elementary, though most of the letters had faded or peeled away with time. "Are you sure we should go in?" Kate asked, her voice low but steady. "We're already here. Do you really think we'll leave without finding out what's inside?" I replied, trying to sound confident. Kate chuckled softly and stepped inside first. The main door groaned loudly as it opened, almost like a warning. The air inside was chilling. The smell of mold and dust filled the air, making me hesitate for a moment. We turned on our flashlights, casting narrow beams of light down the long hallway. Old bulletin boards still hung on the walls, and stacks of dusty desks were piled in the corners like silent sentinels. Then we heard the first sound, footsteps echoing from the adjacent hallway. I turned quickly, but there was no one there. "Did you hear that?" Kate whispered. I nodded, my eyes scanning the hallway. We moved cautiously down the corridor, each step echoing in the eerie silence. Suddenly, the door behind us slammed shut with a deafening boom, making both of us jump. "Welcome to Cedar Mill," I joked, trying to lighten the mood. but my smile quickly faded as we stepped into an old classroom. The classroom looked like it had been frozen in time. Dust-covered desks stood in neat rows, and a large blackboard hung on the wall, still intact. A bookshelf filled with old textbooks leaned precariously in the corner. Kate approached the blackboard. Suddenly, white chalk began to move on its own, scrawling a message right in front of us. "Get out." "Did you see that?" Kate stepped back, her voice trembling. "Yes, and I don't think it's an invitation to stay." At that moment, the desks began to shift slightly, their legs scraping against the floor with an unsettling creak. I aimed my flashlight at them, but there was nothing there, just silence. "We should keep moving," I said, taking Kate's hand and guiding her out of the room. Back in the hallway, the air felt heavier. The footsteps returned, this time louder and closer. Kate froze, pointing toward the far end of the hallway. There, standing in the shadows, was a little girl in a white dress, her hair covering half her face. She didn't move, just stood there, watching us. "Tom, do you see her?" Kate whispered. I didn't respond immediately. When I aimed my flashlight at her, the figure vanished, leaving the hallway empty once more. We pressed on, eventually finding our way to the teacher's lounge. On one of the desks, I found a stack of old notes left by former teachers. The handwriting was hurried and shaky, describing strange occurrences before the school closed, students vanishing in the middle of class, laughter coming from empty rooms, and shadowy figures moving in the night. Kate discovered an old class photo from 1974. But what sent chills down our spines was that every child's face in the photo had been mysteriously blurred out. "I think we're getting in too deep," Kate said, slipping the photo into her pocket. "Or maybe we're getting closer to the truth," I replied, though my gut told me we were in over our heads. Suddenly, the sound of children laughing filled the hallway, soft at first, but growing louder and more menacing. The desks in the teacher's lounge began to move, blocking the doorway. "Run," I shouted, grabbing Kate's hand. We sprinted down the hallway, the laughter chasing after us, echoing through the dark, empty corridors. I didn't dare look back. I knew if we stopped, something terrible would happen. The sound of eerie laughter echoed through the dark, chasing us down the endless hallway. Fear gripped every fiber of my being as the cold air seemed to tighten around us like a noose. Kate held my hand tightly, gasping for breath. "We need to find a way out, now," she said, her eyes darting around, searching for an escape. We turned back toward the main corridor, but everything had changed. The hallway stretched endlessly, with peeling walls and flickering fluorescent lights. The classroom doors on either side swung open and shut on their own, as if mocking us. "Someone is leading us deeper," I muttered, trying to stay calm. Suddenly, a door at the far end of the hallway creaked open, revealing a pitch-black library. With no other choice, we headed inside. The library was shrouded in darkness, with towering shelves of dusty books forming narrow passageways. Our flashlight beams barely pierced the shadows, illuminating just enough to make the place feel even more claustrophobic. Old books lay scattered on the floor, many reduced to decaying pages. As we ventured deeper, books began to fall from the shelves one by one, forming a circle around us. The sound of children's laughter returned, this time closer, and accompanied by faint whispers. In the center of the library, a weathered notebook appeared on the table as if it had been placed there for us. "Tom, look at that," Kate pointed, her voice trembling. I stepped closer and opened the notebook. The pages were filled with accounts of strange phenomena at the school. Dating back to 1974, one entry described the mysterious disappearance of multiple students, with one name repeated several times. Emily disappeared on October 20th. 1974. The final line sent chills down my spine. "The children are still here. The Watcher keeps them with him." Emily, this name keeps coming up. Kate said. She might be the key to all of this. Before I could respond, the library door slammed shut, plunging us into complete darkness. The fluorescent lights outside flickered and died, leaving us trapped in the suffocating black. I swept the flashlight around the room, searching for a way out. Instead of finding an exit, we saw small figures standing at the far end of the library, slowly approaching us. These were not ordinary children. Their pale faces, hollow eyes, and distorted smiles made them look like living statues carved from pure fear. "Stay with us," a sweet but menacing voice whispered from among them. "Run," I shouted, grabbing Kate's arm. We bolted for the window at the back of the library, crashing through it and landing in the hallway once again. But the school was no longer the same. It had become a labyrinth, each door leading to a new, unfamiliar corridor. Kate stopped suddenly, her eyes locking on a large clock hanging at the end of the hallway. "Tom, that clock, it's the key. We have to destroy it," she yelled. "It's what's holding the spirits here." Without hesitation, I sprinted toward the clock. It was an ancient piece, its glass face cracked but the hands still spinning furiously. I picked up a piece of metal from the floor and smashed it into the clock. The glass shattered with a deafening crash, followed by a piercing scream that echoed through the entire building. The walls around us began to shake violently. The shadowy figures disintegrated one by one, their twisted faces fading into the air, leaving behind only an eerie silence. The front doors of the school swung open with a loud bang, and light from the outside world flooded in. We didn't waste a second. Kate and I sprinted out, gulping in the fresh morning air. The school stood behind us, silent and still, like a forgotten monument to the horrors it contained. Kate turned back for one last look. In the second-story window, a small figure stood watching us, a faint smile on its face. "We should never come back here," Kate whispered, clutching my hand tightly. I nodded, starting the motorcycle. "You're right, but I have a feeling stories like this will never stop." We rode away from Millhaven, leaving behind a school filled with dark secrets and restless spirits still trapped in a haunting past. We left the abandoned school just as the first light of dawn broke the horizon. But the lingering chill stayed with us. Perhaps the spirits inside had found peace. But we knew well that the mysteries were far from over. Our journey is not yet finished. Each road we travel, every place we visit, holds secrets buried deep in the shadows, waiting to be uncovered. Join us again in episode 3, where the mysteries grow darker and the encounters become even more terrifying. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you won't miss any part of Tom and Kate's adventure. See you in the next episode.